Right. So, Sunday before last, Bishop Linda Nichols preached a sermon at All Saints Anglican Church. For those of you who aren't aware, if you're watching this for some reason from outside the region, Linda Nichols is the Bishop of the Diocese of Huron, an Anglican diocese in southwestern Ontario, Canada, City of London, although probably not the London you're thinking of. So, Bishop Linda spoke about the future of the diocese and particularly about the need to be looking at closing parishes over the next decade. I think that there's a great deal of value to that. Her arguments, however, were principally financial in nature. She spoke to the number of Anglican parishes which are struggling to pay their priest, which are simply failing to pay their apportionment, which are maintaining their buildings poorly, if at all. And she quite rightly pointed out that that situation can't be sustained indefinitely. And it can't. But the argument doesn't ring entirely true with me. The honest fact is that I've engaged with many arts organisations in London, many of which have been living hand to mouth for decades, or at least years. There are arts groups in the city that are every month trying to figure out where their rent is coming from. And that kind of consistent financial instability is something that can be sustained for dramatically longer than people imagine it can be. It is, moreover, something that can be worthwhile if you have a specific purpose for which you're doing it. But it puts immeasurable stress on everyone involved in running that organization. It means that every month the question of where is our rent coming from this month is virtually the only thing the board can talk about, which puts limitations on even those groups' ability to successfully accomplish their missions, their purpose for existing. It's not dissimilar with the church, only in our case, having more parishes than we need isn't just putting stress on our parish councils, it's actually actively impairing our ability to perform our mission in the world. So, I want to make what I think is a much stronger argument for extensive mergers within the Diocese of Huron, by which I mean of the 20-odd Anglican parishes in London, reducing that number to something like 5, or possibly even 3. Before I begin, I want to stress that this argument applies mostly to urban parishes. I don't really know how to deal with the question of rural parishes. It's well outside my area of expertise, but I'm speaking to places like London, obviously, but also like Sarnia, Chatham, Windsor, St. Thomas, Woodstock, Kitchener, Brantford, where there are a dozen-odd parishes, or at least 5 or 6 parishes within the same city, all of which are having difficulties. Or at least most of which are having difficulties. So, I think part of the problem is that over the past generation we have come to accept less and less and less as the standard of what a healthy parish is. Looking just at the liturgy on a Sunday morning, I would say that a healthy parish should have a priest, should have an assistant priest, should have a deacon. Those 3 positions are all important because they mean that by having a large clergy team, every member of the clergy can actively play to their various respective strengths. That members of the clergy who are good at doing outreach work with the homeless can do that. Members of the clergy who are good at organizational tasks can do that. Members of the clergy who are good at pastoral tasks can do that. Having a strong pastoral team is absolutely crucial to having a well-functioning parish. So, to begin, a priest, an assistant priest, and a deacon. But for the liturgy, we need a head of the Altar Servers Guild and a group of altar servers. We need a head of the Servers Guild and a group of servers. We need a choir master and an organist, and those need to be separate individuals. They need to have a choir of a dozen individuals. Ideally, there would be some additional instrumentalist. I've been to services where the organ's been accompanied by a violin, or a brass instrument. And while we do these now on very special occasions, I could conceive of a church, and in the past there have been churches, many of them, where this has simply been a standard Sunday practice. This isn't even something we consider anymore. We need a head of the Sunday school, a Sunday school director, and there needs to be at least 4 volunteers on a Sunday for the Sunday school, because you need at least 2 with the nursery, and at least 2 with the Sunday school. That's a hefty list of individuals, and we haven't left the area of people doing things on Sunday morning for the service. And while many of those are volunteers, it's worth noting that the priest, the rector, is a full-time paid position, and the assistant priest, the choir master, the organist, and the Sunday school director are all part-time paid positions. And the financial payroll there does add up. When I spoke earlier about churches being able to scrimp and save and make budgets go further, typically one of the ways they do that is by reducing their payroll over and over and over. And that works in the short term. But all of those individuals who are being removed from the payroll had valuable things which they added to the church. So, larger parishes should be capable of supporting a larger and larger portion of that list, possibly the entire list. And as of this moment, there isn't a single parish in the Diocese of Huron that has every one of the paid positions I just mentioned. Even the cathedral has gone to having a single music director as opposed to a separate choir master and organist. And that change happened within the past 20 years. That is, broadly speaking, a very recent change. So, having larger parishes will also let us have groups that have shared interest or shared demographics, that have meaningful numbers of individuals. I engage with youth in the diocese, and for me to do what I want to do, I need to be talking with youth from the cathedral, and often with other parishes as well. There really is no parish in the diocese that has 30 young people at church on a given Sunday. Maybe a couple. Very few. Not the standard parish. And that should be the standard. That should be the given. There should always be a half dozen young people. There should always be a healthy branch of the Anglican Church women. There should always be capacity for people who are physically handicapped, or people who have some other aspect in common, to find people like themselves in their parish, or in some cases in neighboring parishes, and function effectively as a group. We are not making those things happen at the moment, and we aren't making those things happen largely because our parishes are too small, and there simply aren't multiple people of many of these groups within a given parish. I want to talk about outreach, but I'm going to put a pin in that for a moment, because first I want to talk briefly about buildings. I am a heritage geek. I engage quite deeply with the heritage community here in London, and I am well aware that as the Anglican Church, we are truly blessed to have a variety of excellent parishes, excellent Victorian churches across the diocese, all the way from Windsor to Brantford to Owen Sound. Many of our buildings are truly outstanding, and there are people who are deeply attached to them. However, having engaged with the heritage community, I'm more and more and more aware of the number of opportunities for reuse. So I would have 2 things to say. First of all, I would say that we don't need to get rid of those buildings, all of them. It's important that those buildings remain our churches. It's important that when people go to church, they go to church in a building that's aesthetically outstanding, architecturally outstanding, because the aesthetics, because the beauty is part of the service. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. This is why we have a choir. This is why we have a servers guild. And this is why we have outstanding buildings. And so I don't support moving churches into buildings that are smaller, less interesting, and architecturally bland. I was dismayed to hear a few weeks ago that Ingersoll is thinking of selling their church, and there's only one church in the town of Ingersoll, or only one Anglican church in the town of Ingersoll, and the question of where the congregation is moving, because the congregation is not closing, is very much up in the air. My concern is that they're going to move someplace that is architecturally much, much less interesting. However, at the same time, where we have an excess of churches in a given city, and to be clear, in all of our cities we have an excess of churches, there are many, many things that can be done with those buildings. It's important and valuable that we treat our buildings with respect. And that may mean delaying 6 months in selling the building in order to find a purchaser that we are happy with, who are going to treat our buildings appropriately. But it doesn't mean that we need to cling to our buildings like little life rafts, because they aren't. And because, as of the moment, many of those outstanding structures hold congregations that fill a 20th of the space that the building consists of. So, I mentioned I'd come back to outreach. It is crucial that in the Diocese of Huron we engage in outreach to the less fortunate, to individuals who have been abandoned by other parts of society, who are homeless, or who are battered women, who are imprisoned, or who are simply down on their luck for a brief period of time. And some of our parishes are capable of doing truly extensive, outstanding, and valuable outreach work. But many of our parishes are not. I mean, in an ideal world, every parish in the Diocese of Huron would have a daily supper, or at the very least a weekly supper, made available free to the world, to the city. As of the current moment, that is not the case. Only the cathedral maintains a program that ambitious and extensive. And as I understand it, even that program is potentially at risk of shrinking, not of disappearing altogether. And most of our parishes either have no such program or have a program limited to a monthly breakfast or some such thing. With larger parishes, the critical mass to engage in truly impressive outreach, because of the resources that will be freed up elsewhere, is substantial. And that's one of the things that we should be seriously considering when we're discussing how to merge, when to merge, which buildings to keep, or whether to build anew, and how these larger parishes would function. And when you look at it on a diocesan scale, that gets even more impressive, potentially, in terms of what we could accomplish. For instance, with multiple parish mergers across the diocese, enough resources would be freed up that we could look at doing something wild and crazy, like, say, purchasing a farm, which could serve both to provide food for soup kitchens and food banks across the region, and also as a place of sanctuary where people who require a reboot of their life could spend 3, 4, 6 months at the behest of the Anglican Church. We could look at doing things like that, which haven't even been contemplated for some period of time, as the Church has slowly contracted. On an even wilder note, consider the things that SpaceX is proposing over the next 2 decades. We could seriously be looking at human settlements on Mars and the Moon by the time I have children. Well, by the time I have grandchildren. And that's impressive and valuable, and that opens the question, well, where are the churches going to be there? And with freed resources on a diocesan level, we could actually look at answering questions that wild. However, if we continue to cling to each of our buildings, that's never going to happen. I want to end by saying that, as I mentioned at the beginning, we can keep our churches open. We can keep our diocese struggling on for however long it takes for the diocese, for the next decade or 20 years even. But as each of our parishes clings to life, those parishes are going to grow smaller, are going to grow more tired, and more and more and more of the responsibility and the work is going to fall on the same 10 people over and over until they burn out or become exhausted and in some cases die. I mean, we do have an aging congregation in many of our churches. By merging, instead of that slow, long death by ice, so to speak, we can have a smaller number of much more vibrant parishes, more capable of facing the 21st century and capable of no longer merely living month to month, but actively engaging with the world and being a spectacular value to southwestern Ontario in the 21st century.